welcome to the Steve Fox Show, where it's you and the law, where you have the grand opportunity to call in and ask some legal questions, normally of two attorneys. But tonight we have a very, very special guest. We have Ed Celio. Ed, welcome aboard.
Welcome, Steve.
Now, what Ed is, the candidate for the Lancaster City Council. And I've endorsed Ed, and I'm really honored that he's here. And instead of interpreting the law, hopefully if he gets elected, he'll be one of those that make the laws. And Ed, now that we've got you here, what are some of those grand laws I intend to see happen in our fair city?
Well, I don't know if my platform is making more laws. I think one of the things that our city desperately needs is a better base of employment, and not necessarily just retail, but skilled labor. We have the Foxfield Industrial Corridor, which successfully attracted a few businesses, but it's the area that we've laid out in our general plan for industrial types of businesses, large employers with paying a reasonable wage.
Sounds like you're going to stay the course and improve upon it.
Well, some of the other people running for city council, such as Reverend Hearns, has stated that since he's been on the council, the job base has increased, I believe it was 20 or 23%. And that's great, don't get me wrong. But we have to do better than that. We need a focused, well-defined plan to attract more business. The concept of 40,000 people driving down the freeway every day to go to work is
getting worse.
Insane. Absolutely.
I don't know about you, but for 10 years I commuted and I've had my freeway therapy.
I'm fortunate in that I moved up here. I've been here for 20 years. I moved up here in 1982. I've never lived more than 5 miles from where I've gone to work, and that's a beautiful thing. It's allowed me to spend time with my family, to be involved in the community and give back to the community. The poor folks who get up at 4:30 in the morning and don't come home till 7 o'clock at night.
It hurts the quality of our life, and I would agree with that. What are some of the ways to generate business and jobs and employment up here so that those of us who have to commute don't have to do it anymore?
Well, we have in the past relied on just relationships with brokers. We have the Economic Alliance, the Board of Trade, the Chamber of Commerce, and each one of those things is an important part of attracting new business. As you may or may not know, inside of City Hall is something called the Aerospace Office, and it tracks what's happening in the aerospace community because it's such a vital and large part of our economy up here. We have to stay on top of it. We have to make sure that we protect that economic base. We need the same thing for other businesses, whether it be retail, manufacturing, whatever we can get our hands on. We need a focused plan. Rather than just, oh, we heard about something, let's go after that. I'm in the medical community, have been for 20 years, and I can't count the number of things I get in the mail, just whether postcards, brochures, flyers, phone calls, to just asking how I'm doing, any plans in the future for buying products or developing new services.
But you're in demand.
Yes, well.
We have a shortage of medical personnel at this juncture.
But we can do the same thing with our city. We have something that the rest of LA County does not have, and that is vacant land and reasonable housing costs. If I own a business and I'm looking to expand, I have some options. I can go out of the state, which many businesses are, and part of that problem is what's happening in Sacramento and the business unfriendly climate we have in our state at the moment. There's not a lot we can do about that on a local level. We can work with our state legislatures to try and change that. Some businesses have chosen to go United States, Mexico with NAFTA, China, anywhere around the Pacific Rim, Taiwan. What we have to focus on are the people who need to expand, don't want to go out of the state or out of the country, and if they're in the LA basin, they do expand. They look at land costs and what it costs to do business where land prices are astronomical. They start looking around. Well, what's the next nearest thing? The next nearest thing is us. And we need to be able to identify those people, those businesses, be able to offer an attractive package to entice them here. And we can't do that, and we can't give away the farm. There is a benefit for them coming here. They give us jobs, there's tax dollars. What we don't want to do is be careful how we use things like the redevelopment agency. And we want to attract them, not give away more than we're getting in return.
Can I bring up an issue that isn't part of this campaign? Well,
It's a campaign. Everything's open for discussion.
we don't get the county dollars, in my opinion, that we should. We become the orphan child. It's taken years for us to get a court. We had to pull teeth with the county to build a new small hospital that we're starting to build over there on 40th and Palmdale. I don't always feel that the dollars that we pay in taxes come back to us. Now, I notice the San Fernando Valley is looking to break away, perhaps from the County of LA. If that happened, would we stay with the County of LA? Would we form our own jurisdiction? Would we tap in with the San Fernando Valley?
That's a difficult question. I can say, well, let me build on this a little bit. I do agree that we do not get out of the county what we put into it. The Valley down below has recognized the same thing with the city of LA. Example, a few years back, we all recall that certain parties in the city wanted to spread sludge on the ground here in the Valley.
A terrible concept. Put carcinogenics in the air.
And I don't know exactly what happens when you put it in the dirt. I'm assuming if it goes in the dirt, eventually it gets in the groundwater. I just
Those are
can't see
food
where spreading sludge is a good thing for anyone who lives here. But why did they pick the Antelope Valley to spread it? Because to everyone down there,
We're the poor stepchild.
we're the middle of nowhere. How many times have you brought folks up here, and as they drive down the freeway, they see all the lights and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea all this was here.
Well, we need to protect our own interests. There's no question there.
Back to should we, the concept of, and it was brought up recently, of forming our own county. There's a lot of ins and outs there. It may or may not be doable. It really depends. You'd have to look at the numbers that we pay in, what it costs to provide the services. And honestly, as a planning commissioner, I don't have access to those numbers. That would
But as
be
a city
doable
councilman, you
financially or
will.
not. Well, it would be not only the numbers in Lancaster, it would be in Palmdale. It would be the unincorporated portions, and if you were to include places like Santa Clarita, those numbers as well.
I think you gave a good answer. Now, I notice forgive me for asking questions. Now that I've got someone who I've endorsed and have a lot of faith in,
Thank you.
I thought I would push some of your good ideas also. Now, I know we use it's more cost efficient, I guess, for us to use the county sheriffs up here rather than having our own police force because we get the use, I guess, of the equipment down below. Did you want to increase that, or how do you look at the sheriff's department up here?
The Sheriff's Department, we spend, I believe it's somewhere close to $11 million a year. We have one of, if not the largest, contracts with the Sheriff's Department in LA County. That's a lot of money for two reasons. One, the city of Lancaster physically is large. It's about 100 square miles. We're in the top 3 in terms of size for cities in LA County. City of Los Angeles, of course, is the largest. Palmdale is also about 100 square miles. To be honest, I don't know if Lancaster or Palmdale is a little larger. It depends.
Whose map you're looking at?
Exactly. And as you get out towards Quartz Hill, if you live in Quartz Hill, then you know it's hard to know. Am I in Lancaster? Am I in Palmdale? Which side of the street do I live on? Do I get to vote in this election or don't I? The boundaries on the west side is very
I was
difficult.
even in the hospital district because I live way out in Quartz Hill.
But we do give a lot of money to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And part of the reason is that in the past, because housing costs are low, we've had some people move up here, sometimes encouraged by county agencies to move up here because it costs less, whether they be on welfare or some other assistance. And that's caused some problems. And
I know a lot
we've had
of
to
the troubled folk from LA, unfortunately, have moved up here, and they bring some of their troubles with them.
and part of that is that development in the LA Basin, it's full. There is no, there's basically no open space left. We've unfortunately become the affordable housing of LA County, and with we need to look very carefully at our patterns of growth, and as we've done some in the past, we need to continue to do so. look carefully at the types of housing projects we're approving, the kind of amenities and infrastructure they're
In
providing.
other words, not a haphazard growth, but planned it to meet the growing needs, is what you're saying.
True. We have, for instance, about 2 years ago, we had an apartment moratorium for a very good reason. We looked at the number of apartments we had in our city, the number of single-family homes, the amount of land, the number of acres that are with the zoning therein that could become apartments, and realize that we can become way out of balance in terms of apartments as opposed to single-family dwellings. So what the City Council did was they approved an apartment moratorium, gave direction to the Planning Commission and the Planning Department to come up with a method of fairly reducing the number of acres zoned for apartments. And what we wound up with, there was about 430 acres which we rezoned from apartments to single-family housing. We have as you saw in Palmdale just a few days ago, when's the last time we saw people lining up to buy a new house? That's beginning to come back because we're not approving apartments, we're approving single-family housing.
A number of us are left the rental from that was our first house. Can't sell it because the housing market went down, and the houses have a downside where you have more than they're worth. So if you can push up the value, I think we're all appreciative.
Yes. Part of that rezoning, those 430 acres, we prevented approximately 7,000 apartment units that would have been built that weren't. And some of the criteria we used, when a particular parcel of land is zoned for apartments, what's next to it? What we tended to leave alone was parcels that were next to commercial or industrial or streets and highways. If they were next to or adjacent to existing single-family homes, those are the types of zoning we tended to change.
Looking at your list of your platform, I noticed that you're endorsing keeping and improving the quality of our life by restricting billboards, stopping phone sex, alcohol, tobacco, protecting minors from being subjected to that type of thing. What are some of the things you're planning on doing once you're elected?
We have, as I've done in the past, we had prohibited some things to protect our citizens where, we outlaw the spreading of sludge in our city, which is, we're one of the last cities to do that, I believe. We recently revised our adult-oriented business ordinance to keep in up to date with the current cases moving through the courts. Unfortunately, the types of people who sell that types of videos and businesses make a lot of money. And every chance they get, they scream First Amendment. Not that I have anything against First Amendment, it's a great thing, but they're using it to sell pornography. And we've had
abusing their privilege. One Supreme Court Justice Learned Hand, said, "My rights end at the end of my fist and the beginning of your nose," implying there are limited rights in this country. You have rights so long as you're not infringing on someone else. And unfortunately, they use as a smokescreen free speech to infringe upon the rights of our children and ourselves.
That's true. What we did is the Supreme Court has said we have to allow them, so we do.
Allow them someplace else.
Well, what we've done is we need a place in our city as far away from where people live, where they work, where they go to school, where they go to church. So what we've said is you may go in the city as long as you're in an industrial zone. Many of them have approached us almost monthly. They see what the climate is, and they see our ordinance, and to be honest, it's like protecting your home from a burglary. You can break into any house you want. You have to make your house harder to break into than the guy next door. And that's what we've done. They could move here if they wanted to. Supreme Court says you have to allow them in some fashion, but they look at our ordinance and they say, we'd rather go down here where things are much...
So the way you do it is time, place, and manner. You make it so unprofitable for them that hopefully they'll go elsewhere.
Yes, yes.
That sounds like a pretty good plan. Again, I want to remind the public you can call in at any time and ask Ed anything on his campaign. The phone number is 726-0382. And again, we have Ed Celio, who I've endorsed, who's running for the Lancaster City Council. And I think hopefully he'll be elected and continue some of these positive policies that he's putting forward.
Steve, you mentioned some of the laws I wanted to pass when I become, hopefully, if I am elected, which I believe I will. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here putting forth the time and effort. What I will plan on doing in the future. I think one of the things we need to do is simply exist some of the ordinances and laws we have. An example, recently, if we read the Valley Press, we saw Lancaster Boulevard, there's a couple of group homes. They feel that you can have 16 or 20 people living there and you don't need a permit from the city, you don't need anything. The city has taken just the opposite position. It is possible to have a group home in the city of Lancaster. We have many. I have one 2 doors down from my house. I didn't even know it was there because there happens to be 6 or fewer residents. 6 or fewer residents, the state has said, you don't need a conditional use permit from the local city. You are simply allowed to it's a low enough impact that you're allowed, you can skate by without a conditional use permit. The city has filed suit against the operator of these 2 homes simply to comply with our existing ordinances. If you want to have a group home with 16 or 20 or 7, anything over 6 people, you simply need to come down to City Hall, file the paperwork, have a public hearing, do what the ordinance says. Rather than thumbing your nose at our city and somehow believing that they can get by skirting our ordinances, and the public has no input that way.
With that, we have a call. This is Ed Celio with Steve Fox. What can we do for you?
I was calling to find out if there's any plans in the near future to have Quartz Hill be incorporated into the city of Lancaster so that it can benefit from the city.
To my knowledge, there are no plans to incorporate more of Quartz Hill. About 1997-98, we updated the general plan for our city, which is essentially the constitution of how our city grows and unfolds. And every single public hearing we had, I can't count the number of people who said, keep Quartz Hill rural.
Oh, okay.
And unless some segment of Quartz Hill came to the city of Lancaster and said, we would like to be incorporated, I have no desire to go out and just incorporate more land for the sake of making our city bigger. Our city is 100 square miles. I think it's plenty big enough. We have room to grow. There's no need to increase the size of our city at this time. And we're in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Actually, Palmdale, I think, took a chunk of us because I'm in Quartz Hill, and Palmdale has reached in and taken the area I live in. I think M is now the dividing. I notice sometimes one side of the street is very well kept, and the other side of the street, Palmdale, unfortunately, was not where I was. So the 2 cities do function differently, I've noticed. So I wouldn't blame her if wanting to be part of this city, which is actually a compliment to you and to others. Now, you were on the Planning Commission for 6 years, I believe? Could you tell us a little bit what you did and how that interrelated?
I was originally appointed to the Planning Commission in 1996.
And this is for the city of Lancaster? For
the city of Lancaster. 1997, I was vice chairman. 1998, I became the chairman, and for the first time in city history, they chose not to rotate my fellow commissioners, all of whom have endorsed me in my run for city council, elect each year to leave me on as chairman. I always give them the option, and you guys want to step up to the plate, have at it. But they like the direction we're going and have supported me.
So basically, you've helped develop our city for 6 years and added that, not even been a city councilman.
Yes, the Planning Commission, let me talk a little about what the Planning Commission does. The Planning Commission is in charge of, well, we babysit the general plan. The general plan has many elements. As I said, it's the constitution of how our city unfolds. It covers everything from the environment, public health, public safety, fire, police protection, traffic, how we actually move around our city, whether it be by cars, bicycles, trains, jet airplane, monorail, all that is included in the traffic element of the general plan. Municipal services, things you don't think about, like sewer and water, electricity. Economic development, which is a big one. Again, the way we develop affects how we're going to develop economically. Where are we zoning for industrial areas,
So you're
for
planning for the
commercial and
future, in other
retail?
words.
Absolutely. If we, I always say that growth is going to happen. We can plan for it or we cannot plan for it. As I said, the LA basin is filling up. People are going to arrive in the Antelope Valley. We can plan for that growth, control it, make it the kind of growth that we like, or it's going to overrun us.
And if we don't plan for it, obviously our services are going to be overtaxed, may end up breaking down. So I have to concur with you that we do have to plan. Do you have any idea what the projections of population growth? I know we did one survey through the hospital a couple of years ago, and it projected the growth is going to be staggering.
I don't recall the exact year that our population will double. I know the general plan projects out to the year 2020. It's a 20-year plan. And as I looked at the numbers for 2020, I thought, where are all these people going to go? And we have to plan for it.
And with that, we go to commercial. And again, I do appreciate you, Ed, coming on. Welcome back to the Steve Fox Show, where it's you and the law. But tonight we have a very special guest, Ed Celio, who's a candidate for Lancaster City Council, who I'm endorsing. And Ed will be in a position, if elected, to make some of those very laws that attorneys like myself interpret. Ed, welcome again here. I appreciate you being on. And it appears we have another phone call.
Okay, let's have it, Steve.
I'm with Ed Celio. This is Steve Fox. Can we help you?
Yes, hi. I'd like to ask Ed a question.
Certainly.
Sure. Why is the city of Lancaster allowing drug addicts to live in those houses over on Lancaster Boulevard?
Could you be a little more specific as to which houses?
The ones that are right past 10th West over by 10th and 11th?
You're referring to the group homes, which we had just discussed. And the city has, as a planning commissioner, love to do something about it. But their current status is they haven't even gone far enough to apply for any permits with the city. The only option left for the city to pursue was to take the operators of these homes to court to force them to come to the city to go through the same process that you and I would go through if we were to open a business. The kinds of things that would happen when I believe the city will prevail in the case and shut these homes down and force them to come to the city again, like you and I. What would happen the process when that happens is they'll go through a conditional use permit hearing, and the city would decide how many residents would be acceptable in that type of neighborhood and that type of setting. What sort of conditions would be attached to that? Not only just the sheer number of people occupying those residences, but there's traffic with cars, there's foot traffic at all hours of the day and night. We would have to take a look at the noise that generates and all the other negative effects that would have on the surrounding.
Like property taxes?
Plain and simple, how does it affect their neighbors, to put it
Right.
It
plain and
affects
simple
us
terms?
substantially.
Right.
Now I have, as Steve and I had talked about, he asked me what sort of laws would I like to see in the future, and I said what I want to do is enforce the ones we have, and this is a perfect example.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
We thank you for calling.
Thank you very much.
And again, you had a lot of good ideas. I'd like to see you be given the opportunity to enforce them and put them into action. And that's why I'm hoping you win the election and can do some of these things.
Well, I have one of the reasons why I chose to run for city council is there was an open seat. Michelle Eidelman chose not to run for re-election. She had another child, chose to spend more time with her family, and that's a great reason. I think that's a wonderful reason. And she has in fact also chosen to endorse me for her seat. I looked around and said, who's out there who has experience running our city? And as being involved with what goes on in our city for the last 6 years, directly with what goes on with our I have the experience and am familiar with the problems facing our city, and I think I can hit the ground running and not have to be brought up to speed as to the issues that face our city.
And I realize many people brought up to speed. Unfortunately, by the time they get to that point, it's time for the next election. So I'm kind of glad someone like yourself with the experience with our city is decided to take on the task. I'm going to remind the public they can call in again at 726-0382. That's 726-0382, and ask Ed or myself a question. Go ahead, Ed.
Well, Steve, you're a director of the Antelope Valley Healthcare District. How long did it take you to feel comfortable?
You know, it's a good question, because you think you know a substantial amount. Then when you get there, it seems to be overwhelming. And, well, 10 years later, I think I've got a pretty good grasp, and I do my best to listen to the employees and the patients. I think at the first time I got elected, I didn't know perhaps as much as I would have liked to have known. And that's why the fact that you've got 6 years experience in helping plan our city, and now you can put some of your ideas into action, I commend you. I probably should have done the same thing when I ran. And of course, I went through trial by fire and learned quite a bit.
Unfortunately, the hospital board doesn't have a planning commission to become familiar with the issues first.
We do have a long-range strategic planning, but again, we've had a, unfortunately, changeover of administrators. Luckily, we got rid of one of the bad ones and got an excellent one, Matthew Abraham, which is doing our best to give our employees raises and make sure we have the highest level of services for our patients.
Just for full disclosure, I do work at Antelope Valley Hospital and have for 3 years.
and I hope I've done a good job for you as an employee.
Yes, you have. Many of my friends, I was familiar with the issues facing Antelope Valley Hospital and some of the trials and tribulations that went through the last several years. And I look at the morale at the hospital compared to what it was, say, 7 years ago. Better place not only to work, but to get your health care.
And I want to point out the hospital needs representatives on both cities to work with it if we're to continue with the health care. And that's why I'm hoping you get elected, so we'll have someone that's hospital friendly, which can help us put forward the health care in the city of Lancaster. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a personal reason, but the hospital needs friends to ensure that we can deliver the care when it's needed.
Well, you brought up an issue, speaking of the hospital, and one of the things that we have to recognize is that Lancaster and Palmdale do not compete against each other.
We're all part of the same hospital district, and we will, again, diseases don't have an address. We will sink or swim together. So many times we have to find ways to cooperate.
Whether it be in healthcare or in business, if we're fighting over a business, whether it comes to Palmdale or whether it comes to Lancaster, if they chose to go to Palmdale instead of Lancaster, would that make me unhappy? Only a little bit. I'm happy they came to the Antelope Valley. What we have to work together with the City of Palmdale, whether that be through the Board of Trade, the Chambers of Commerce, the Economic Alliance, whatever it takes to attract new business, we have to work together. Because we're not fighting, as I said, we're not fighting Palmdale. We're fighting the rest of the state of California, the states of Arizona, Nevada, states which are more business friendly, Mexico, Pacific Rim.
Bigger fish to fry, and your point's right. With that, we do have a call on one. This is Steve Fox with Lancaster City Council candidate Ed Celio. Can we help you?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Celio.
Yes.
I noticed on your walk piece that you have supported many elected officials. Why are they supporting you?
I believe for one reason. I've been involved in the affairs of our city and our valley as a planning commissioner for 6 years. I've worked with many of them. The existing Lancaster City Council endorses me. My fellow planning commissioners endorse me. All of the hospital board has endorsed me, members of the Antelope Valley Eastern Water Agency, members of the Antelope Valley College District, the Lancaster School District, members of the Antelope Valley Union High School District. I believe they've endorsed me because they've seen me working in the city. They've seen how I come to conclusions when issues face our city, and I can only conclude that they like what they see.
Let me help to give my viewpoint on that, being one of those elected officials. I'm an independent. I live in this valley. I'm not part of any good old boys club. And I want what's best for the area I live and raise my 2 children. And I want other people in the office as a voter like yourself that have those same values, that want what's best for our city, to keep the money here, up the health care, and do the best thing. And just like you, as a voter, I have a right to put forward someone I think is going to represent the public's interests and not any private interests. And that's one of the reasons I'd like to see it elected. And I'd like to thank you.
Let me give an example of, for instance, Assemblyman Runner had a bill passed recently that it's not a real sexy issue, but it was simply allowing the state to count mobile homes as affordable housing. Now, you look at that and say, why is that even important? One of the elements of our general plan is the housing element, and it's the only element of our general plan in which the state has to review. And why does the state want to review it? Because the state has decided that every community must have affordable housing.
So that way they don't have to do anything if it's...
Right. That's an example of the state pushing a statewide problem onto a city.
Nothing gets past you. That's good.
Well, affordable housing, as I said, the Antelope Valley is becoming the affordable housing region of LA County. It's a regional issue. When the state says affordable housing, they're saying 50% of the median income or less. Well, 50% of the median income for us is much lower than it is 50% of the median income in the city of LA. There's not even a mechanism at the statewide level for, say, Lancaster and Palmdale, the unincorporated area, to get together and say, we have enough affordable housing here or through this program. They want to see it in each individual city, and the Sacramento solution to affordable housing, because they live in an area that's completely built out, their idea of affordable housing is apartments. There are other things besides apartments. I defy any state official to come and tell me that a mobile home is not affordable housing when you compare it to a single family dwelling. We have many mobile home parks within our city. Prior to Mr. Runner's bill, we were not able to count those towards our allotment of affordable housing. Now we can do that. It allows us, again, to build the types of dwellings that we would like to live in rather than simply building more apartment complexes.
Let me see. I'm wondering if these calls are for us. Attorney Steve Fox with Lancaster City Council candidate Ed Celio. Can we help you?
Hello?
Yes. Can we help you?
Hi. I was wondering, I've noticed a lot of teenagers in our city complain that there's nothing to do for them. And I was just wondering if this council could work with local businesses and create structured, safe things for them to do.
That's an excellent thing. I'll tell you, that's a very easy thing to say and a very difficult thing to put into practice. Because what we would like to do is people want to send their children to something which is structured, and younger kids would do great with that. Most teenagers, you tell them to go someplace where there's going to be adults looking over their shoulder, they don't want to go.
What about the younger kids then?
Well, there's a couple ways to approach this problem. Do we want our local government setting up essentially what would be child care, or should that be done through more through private enterprise, whether that be through our churches or through teen community centers? On the Planning Commission, we did approve a conditional use permit for a business called Savannah's, which is over at 15th West and J8. And their thrust is, in the evenings, is to essentially be a supervised teen hangout. They bring in bands of the type that I personally can't stand to listen to, but teenagers love, and I was the same way when I was a teenager. Well, the types of music I listened to would drive my father crazy, and my mother as well. But we need to give them a safe place to express themselves, and they can enjoy some freedom, but there's still a little oversight there to keep them from getting into trouble.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Attorney Steve Fox with City Council candidate Ed Celio. Can we help you?
Good evening. Yes, I had a question for the candidate, and it being, I live in Acton, and I was from Santa Clarita. And being in Acton, it seemed better for me to go into Palmdale to do my shopping, Christmas shopping, and with the growth of all the businesses, it was extremely appealing. But also, I noticed that there seemed to be a little more problem with people that have basically bombarded Palmdale that weren't exactly what I would call your upstanding citizen. And I mean, I've been panhandled in front of Vaughn's, where you wouldn't be panhandled in front of Vaughn's in Santa Clarita. And I was wondering what they plan to do. And also, the last time I was in Target at 12 noon, a lady was robbed right inside the store. And it just never seemed that was happening in Santa Clarita. And I think a lot of it was that the police presence was extremely fierce, and it doesn't seem to have that in Palmdale. And I would love to support it, but I'm afraid to shop there. So I was wondering what his plans were as far as, if you have a rush of people coming to a city, how do you control the crime rate when you're trying to build the city?
Let me... Well, I can't address what happens in Palmdale because I'm a Lancaster planning commissioner, although the process is the same in each city. And let me tell you how I approach the crime problem. There's two ways to deal with crime. One is reactive. A crime has occurred, you call 911, you send a cop. That's how most of us traditionally think of law enforcement. And as I said before, growth will occur. Our population is going to increase. Even if we sealed off the borders, our population would still increase. If we just cut the 14 freeway in half there and didn't allow anybody to come or to leave, there's more people being born than there is dying. So our population is going to increase. We know people are going to move up the freeway to the Antelope Valley. Well, how do we deal? Just by there being more people, even with the same crime rate, we'll have more overall crime. From the reactive sense, we have to make sure we have enough deputies to respond to calls in a timely fashion. As I said, City of Lancaster has a very large law enforcement budget, and we use that to the best of our abilities. We need to stay on top of, as our population grows, do we still have the same number of deputies on the streets per 1,000 residents? As the population goes up, we need more deputies on the street.
I noticed, excuse me, that I grew up the last 20 years in Santa Clarita, and I mean, everyone knows how fast that grew, but it didn't seem to have the crime problem that is occurring down in the Antelope Valley.
We do have a crime problem. I can't deny that. In addition to, as I said, to reactive law enforcement, we have to have proactive law enforcement. We have in the past done operations like Silent Thunder, which was about a 1.5 year long methamphetamine undercover operation, which put a huge dent in methamphetamine sales, not just in the Antelope Valley, but I believe regionally. In this part of the state. Men in Black, both parts 1 and 2, they ran it more than once. Essentially was a storefront fencing operation. People came in, sold their stolen goods. They kept tabs on them. When the time came, made some mass arrests, put dents by taking those criminals that you were referring to, by taking them off the street and putting them in jail. If we're not able to put them in jail, we just chase after them every time there's a crime and show up 15 minutes or a half hour after the crime has occurred. That's not a very efficient way to go after crime. I think the way to put the serious dent in our crime rate are those proactive programs.
I agree. I'm glad to hear you say it, though.
Well, not only proactive in the sense of going after the hardened criminals, we also we have deputies in the schools, and that's a very important piece of the puzzle, because once somebody is a hardened criminal, it's awful hard to turn them into a productive citizen. If we can get to those kids 14 to 17 years of age, right, I think not only is it better for that child and their family, but just for a community, less crime, and it economically it costs less to deal with if we can get to it early.
Well, thank you so much for answering my question, and I hope you win.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I just wish you lived in Lancaster, but hey, you can't have everything.
Maybe she has friends and relatives. It looks like, hopefully, with you on the board, we'll be going in a more positive direction. And I think with the growth coming into our valley, we're going to need to be properly prepared for that. Is there any other things that you want to bring up besides the local jobs? You brought up the responsibility to our city and our churches, strengthening our ordinances.
Really, I've talked about things we've done. I really haven't talked about who I am.
Go for it.
I've lived in the Antelope Valley since 1982. I raised my family here, my lovely wife Linda, my stepson Josh, who's going to Antelope Valley College, who, hard as I try, has decided he wants to be a teacher. I told him he's not going to make any money that way, and he looked at me and he said 3 months off during the summer, so I don't know how to argue against that. But no, I think it's wonderful that he wants to be a teacher. He has a real love for history. I've worked in the Antelope Valley for 20 years in the healthcare field. May I've taken care of you or your family. I'm a what's called a cardiovascular sonographer, which we specialize in ultrasound of the heart and the circulatory system. So we take care of people with strokes and heart attacks, and sometimes with trauma. I care about our city. I care about the people in it. As I said, I'm fortunate that I've always lived virtually right next door to where I've worked. So I've had that extra time to be able to give back to my community. As my son was growing up, it was in Boy Scout.
And I like that you want to try to make it possible for the rest of us to spend more time in the valley.
Absolutely. I think the single best thing that we can do for someone who lives in Lancaster, if they're driving down the hill, down the 14 freeway for 3 hours a day.
Is that our nightmare?
Is, well, there's other nightmares like Highway 138, but that's not in our city. The single best thing we can do for them is to bring employers where they can work locally. They can spend time with their family. It's awful hard. We talked about children who are at risk. A lot of those children who are at risk because they may be a single-parent family, and they've got a parent has to drive 60 miles to go to work and back. And that's no fault of that parent, but they're forced to get up early. Maybe a relative takes the child to school, or he has to take the bus to school. Then he may be unsupervised when he comes home. That's just not an environment, not the best environment for that child. Again, nothing against that parent. We all do what we have to do. But if we took that same parent and said, here, we'll get you a job that makes the same amount of money. It takes you 10 minutes to get to work rather than an hour and 10 minutes or an hour and 45 minutes. I think that's the best thing we can do for them.
And I want you to know it takes me 3 hours, literally, to go from the valley to 8:30 to downtown LA Court. So I'm hoping that the county eventually builds the court in our valley, because I'm tired of the freeway therapy, of wasting all those hours back and forth.
I would support that, of course, and look at how long it took us to get a civil court. We had to deal with the politics of the county and downtown, and you would know that better than I in the field that you're in.
Again, I want to thank you for your support to the hospital in the past. Healthcare is a growing need, and you've helped us in that respect. And again, I'm hoping to see you, Ed Celio, on the City Council, along with Reverend Hearns, Frank Roberts, along with my other pitches, Rich Naranjo for Judge and Sharon Runner for State Assembly. I think there's a lot of good people out there, and I'm hoping we take the ball and run with it.
You brought up something that no one has really brought up yet, and that's the judges' race. Is that also an election?
We have a local person running, one of our local district attorneys, Rich Naranjo, running, and the problem is they have just changed judges from a local election to county-wide. So the day of us getting local people elected may be in an end.
That was the switch from, I believe there's no longer any municipal court judges. Everybody became a superior court judge.
And they're now electing those county-wide. Luckily, we have a very good district attorney, Rich Naranjo, running for judge, and I've endorsed him too. And so again, I would have wished that, like City Council, the local people could pick who our representatives and who's going to make decisions over us are, but that is no longer going to be the case.
Well, we need to support our people running for county-wide offices or judgeships. As we talked about, we don't have enough representation at the county level.
Oh, I agree.
And that's one way we can do that.
Nor do we get our fair share of the buck.
Absolutely true.
And with that, this is Attorney Steve Fox with Ed Celio. Can we help you? Well, actually, you've got a lot of phone calls.
Or not.
We have gotten quite a few, more than most, and it shows that our public is interested. They do care what happens. The city council does have an effect on our lives.
Well, I think our city is at a turning point. In the past, if we go back and look during the 80s, this was a developer-driven town. The economy essentially crashed, and we were left with housing projects spread all over the valley. One of the things we did was in our plan for development was to not renew those types of projects and force them to come a little bit closer to our
With that, we'll
core.
go with our last break. Welcome back to the Steve Fox Show, where it's you and the law. But tonight we have a very special guest. We have someone who's available to make the laws if he's elected, and that's Ed Celio. Ed, again, I'm glad you're on our show.
It's a pleasure to be
We
here,
have a little
Steve.
time left. If any of you members of the public want to call in and ask Ed Celio a question, it's 726-0382, 726-0382. This is for the Lancaster City Council race. We're almost coming to an end. Ed, do you have some main thoughts or ideas you want to let the public know so they can have that information before they walk into that ballot box?
Actually, Steve, we're talking about prior to the commercial. Started to talk about a little bit of the history of the development of our city in the 80s. Developers were going crazy. If you could swing a hammer, you were building a housing tract. And as the economy, there was a downturn in the economy, and we reworked our general plan. We talked about population estimates. They were revised downward severely. We're still going to grow quite a bit, but not to the point that the numbers from the 80s suggested. We rebalanced our general plan and our development in terms of number of apartments versus single-family dwellings. The next step, I believe, is to look very seriously at our business climate. We have to be faster and do things better than other cities around Southern California to attract that kind of business. We also have a shortage of good retail, not just in the Antelope Valley, because you go to the mall and there's basically Wonder Row and a Starbucks, my favorite place, right next to the mall. We have the retail base in Lancaster is not that diversified. We want to diversify it. We want something as simple as buying a shirt or a suit. What happens? I have to go to the mall. There's no place locally, and I wish there was. We need to look very seriously at the way our city's laid out, and can we do something to encourage business to come to a particular part of our city. We have around Jethawk Stadium and the Cinemark some open land there and owned by the redevelopment agency. We can put some larger projects in there. I think as our cities grow, and particularly as they grow together, closer and closer to the cactus curtain that we need to tear down, I think along 10th Street West, from about Avenue K8, Avenue L, towards Palmdale, there's some open space there. I think that's a good place to look at to extend that retail from Palmdale on into our city. That I think would draw from both cities. I think that would be a good thing. We have to convince the retailers that that's a good thing. Look at people say, how come Palmdale gets everything? Well, if you're a marketer and you're putting in a Big Five or a sports chalet, what does your marketing plan say? Your marketing plan says, put it next to a mall. Well, Palmdale has a mall, and that's really what all this stems from. Palmdale got the mall, the retailers flocked around the mall. If I were a business owner, I'd do the same thing. We need to convince retailers that, hey, 130,000 people live in Lancaster,
It's a lot.
and they spend money too.
No, I would tend to agree with you. Do you ever see the two cities merging, or do you think it's better off that we've divided it into two cities? I know I asked some hard questions, but I have faith in you.
I don't, given the current climate in each city hall, I think there's so much bad blood. I don't see it happening in the near future.
Well, it's nice, and again, I realize you never threw a stone, so I have to commend you for always taking the high road.
And I won't throw a stone. Palmdale is our neighbor. We have to get along. It's just like look at those folks on Lancaster Boulevard. Look at the neighbor they have to deal with, a group home that's doing things that, if what I read in the paper is true, is clearly outside the bounds of the law. They're not being good neighbors. On the citywide sense, we have to be good neighbors. As I said before, I'm not thoroughly unhappy when a business moves to Palmdale because at least it moved to the Antelope Valley. We need to have...
The money filters around, sure.
Sure. Not everyone who is employed by a business in Palmdale lives in Palmdale, and vice versa. The Antelope
They might
Valley,
work in Palmdale and bring their money back to Lancaster.
exactly true. Must have been about a year and a half ago, was at a breakfast meeting, and our speaker was the CEO of Countrywide Mortgage. And what struck me, as you know, Countrywide is in the process of building a building and moving to the business park here in Lancaster, and going to bring about 500 jobs. What struck me when he drove up here, he was driving against the flow of traffic because it was a breakfast meeting, and one of the first things that he said was, "Wow, I didn't know all this was up here." We need to get that message out to the rest of the businesses in the LA business in the LA basin.
Maybe we need to do some PR outside of our city and district and bring it back. And with that, it's unfortunately time to say goodbye, Ed. Any last words to our public?
Number one is vote. Last time, less than 10% of the voting population voted. Number one, you need to vote. Whether you vote for me or someone else, absolutely vote. As we've been discussing for the last hour, I think I have a plan to bring new business and make sure we develop in a responsible manner that benefits both businesses and the residents of the Antelope Valley.
And Ed, again, I'd like to thank you for being on the show, and you've got my endorsement.
Thank you, Steve, very much.
Thank you again.